first. Let's turn our attention to Paul Dolan, Professor of Behavioural Science at London School of Economics and also host of the Duck Rabbit podcast. Professor, do let me know what you make of these latest threats that we're going to see further lockdowns. Is it the right decision?
Yeah, listen, morning. Thank you for having me on, James. Short answer, I think not. I mean, we're living in a world of uncertainty, so no one can be absolutely categorically clear about what the right thing to do is. But I think there's two main issues with the call for further restrictions. One is an assumption that they work, and the evidence on that is at best mixed. I mean, if you look at the various countries around the world that have had the most severe and the least severe measures. Oh, I really apologise for some reason. The radio's just come on for some reason. So I have no idea what happened there.
It's the ghosts of Omicron.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, it is. It is. Anyway, so there's very little correlation with hospitalisations and deaths based on the severity of the measures put in place. So,
but then on the other hand, why have, for example, countries like the Netherlands, so they've entered a very strict lockdown. We've now seen Germany impose restrictions on travellers. Again, with France, they've imposed restrictions, particularly on people from the UK and travellers there because they are concerned about the spread. And I suppose what government or indeed others would say is that the reason that you have a lockdown, you're not going to eliminate Omicron or coronavirus, but what you do is you slow the spread. And if you slow the spread, then it means that people perhaps cope better. And I suppose one of the biggest concerns that we've got is whether or not people end up in hospital is one thing. If, however, people get Omicron and therefore they have to isolate or they have to take time off and then your essential services become paralysed, that is a major concern. And that's sort of what we're facing here in the UK, isn't it?
Of course it is. And it is a major concern. But the issue is, as I say, whether those measures, and also, of course, it's about the timing of them, right? So when we went first into lockdown March last year, cases had already started falling. And that is a lot because people had changed their behaviour. So that sort of raises the issue of then whose responsibility is it? Is it the role of the state for us, to be told what to do?
Well, or it's the role of the state.
Should we by now 20 months in, James? Should we by now 20 months in be...
Yeah, but it's the role of the state
to make some of these decisions ourselves.
Okay, it's the role of the state to protect its citizens. It is also the role of the state to, for example, undertake the rollout of the jab and the booster program, which they appear to be doing. I mean, look, on the front page of every newspaper today, they spent an absolute fortune on this. Get boosted now, they're saying. I mean, is this kind of measure effective, or would it be better for the Prime Minister to agree to come onto this show and to talk about it?
Right. So the other thing then is to say that there's no such thing as a free lunch. So we talk a lot about whether these measures bring benefits, but talk very little about the economic, health and social harms of them. It's about time, isn't it, don't you think? 21 months in, that we should at least be having a conversation when these kinds of restrictions are suggested about the harms caused by them.
Well, I think we all know. Yeah, but
James,
we all know, Paul. We all know about the harms that are caused by this, and I understand a range of mental health issues, of issues relating to schools and the impact upon children and their education, the impact upon the health service and the number of people who are now on waiting lists, the impact on our nation in terms of economic growth or otherwise, the cost of implementing all sorts of issues. I agree. In addition to that, though, the one simple thing that I really don't understand why the government isn't doing this is to provide better data. The data that we're receiving is abominable.
Right.
We don't have an analysis of who is in hospital with COVID, but also due to other health complications. We don't have information as to who is vaccinated and who is not vaccinated. And we also don't have information as to how old they are. We don't have information as to whether people are dying from COVID or with COVID. And to my mind, until or unless we get proper data, good data, more efficient data, then how on earth is we as people supposed to make up our minds as to whether the restrictions or things that we're being asked to do are sensible or the right thing to do?
Well, I couldn't have put that better myself. You say that you understand the economic and the, social harms and mental harms, but they're not being properly measured and evaluated. People say they understand them, but every time the restrictions are spoken about, they're only spoken about in terms of the transmission impacts. They're not spoken about in terms of these other impacts. 21 months in, the process of policy making is completely and utterly broken if we aren't able to properly account for those impacts.
Okay,
That's the
so
first thing to emphasise. And as you rightly say, it's about evidence and data, but we're not being presented with any. All we're given is a very narrow range of outcomes associated with Omicron.
Okay, well, I'm going to be speaking to Dominic Grieve very shortly, so we'll see if we can get some sense from him on this. Just finally to you, Paul, if the government impose further lockdown restrictions, do you think they'll be effective? Do you think they'll be adhered to?
Well, I think the public mood has changed, I think, significantly since last year. I think that, again, it's about understanding these data in the context. There are lots of reasons why transmission rates have risen. It's not just a variant change. There's respiratory viruses at this time of year. People are changing their behaviour. There's all these things that impact upon those outcomes. And our policy discussions are so narrowly focused. That's my main point, is that if we're going to put these kinds of measures in place, we need to do a proper appraisal of their full impacts. And which is why I answered your question right at the top about I think not, because I'm pretty much convinced, and I think that we're going to show this in years to come, that the harms caused by those impacts are going to be much greater than the benefits that will come from them.
Paul Dolan.
That's the fundamental point that I think.
Okay, there we go. Thank you very much indeed. Paul Dolan, Professor of Behavioural Science at London School of Economics and host of the Duck Rabbit podcast.